Hey everyone! In this video, I want to go over a couple things to keep in mind or to consider looking at after nerfs or an expansion, basically anything that is going to change the meta, and kind of how we evaluate and look at the meta in general and break it down to give you an idea of what decks might be good after a change or what decks you could potentially be playing after those changes take place. So the first thing I want to talk about is just the most recent nerfs, just to give some background and an example, but the tips that I'm going to go over should be able to apply to any kind of change or any nerf, no matter what the nerf is. So in the most recent nerfs, there were 5 different cards hit, and right off the bat, a rogue card and 2 druid cards. Now, both of the druid cards were played in almost every druid deck and kind of built a basis for druid. They allowed the druid to get mana much earlier than their opponent, get to their big stuff, their end game things a lot faster, and the change we see with the druid cards here is that it just slowed the druid down. Not only just in one of the cards, but in both of them. So really it ended up slowing down druid a lot, and ultimately are changing the way that people are playing druid, if they're playing druid at all. And the rogue card here, leeching poison, having that lifesteal on the weapon on Kingsbane for only 1 turn instead of having it permanent, really did some damage on Kingsbane deck and changed how it ultimately functions, and really has led to Kingsbane Rogue not actually even seeing play anymore. And the second 2 cards here, Serenite Chain Gang, the battle cry being changed to summon another Serenite Chain Gang instead of summon a copy of this minion, affected several decks. Mainly though, the big change that this impact had was removing that Shudderwalk effect of Shudderwalk being able to copy itself and copies being put back into the hand to replay for an infinite combo. One of the other big implications of this change is that any copy effects or buff effects, anything like that that would have come from the summon a copy of this minion, now do not apply. So if a Keleseth buff or any type of buff that would make the chain gang bigger is only applied to the initial chain gang and not the copy as well. So it really had an impact on multiple decks. And the last nerf here is to level up, making it cost 6 instead of 5. So it can no longer be played in Odd Paladin, where it was really strong, and has hurt Odd Paladin overall as a deck, and we're not really seeing that in the meta at all anymore. So one of the first things we want to look at when evaluating the nerfs and evaluating how it's going to change the meta is how many decks did it affect. So 5 different cards being changed, 1 neutral card, and then several class cards, ultimately affecting a variety of decks and a variety of classes. So the next thing we need to look at is, were there any decks before these changes that were strong that did not get affected? And if they were strong before the changes, the chances are that they're really going to be strong after the changes. They might be at the same strength level, and they might have actually gotten stronger. And the biggest example of that in this current meta after these nerfs is Death Rattle Hunter specifically, but just Hunter as a class in general. There were no Hunter cards that were nerfed, and the 1 neutral card that was nerfed really isn't being played at all in Hunter anyways. And this also does lead to the next point, which is looking at how the now nerfed decks and archetypes and classes affected the decks that were already strong. Kingsbane Rogue did really well against Spell Hunter, and sometimes could even do well against Death Rattle Hunter. And Odd Paladin was really good against Hunter as well, because especially Death Rattle Hunter just didn't have any way to deal with those wide boards. So now we look at the fact that 2 decks that were good against Hunter are now gone, and Hunter was already in a good spot before, which just makes Hunter even better now. And another thing we want to look at is now this additional shift. So we see kind of what we expect to be the best or the strongest, after the changes. And the next level on top of that is to look at what can do really well against the now strongest deck. And currently that seems to be Priest. So Priest has risen in popularity and has grown stronger because of it. And what we really want to look at when we're thinking about this is what cards and tools do these decks, these archetypes, these classes have that make them so good against each other. So in Priest, with this newest expansion, we have Mass Hysteria, and we still have Psychic Scream. So those tools, being able to have hunters, large minions, attack each other and kill each other off, and then be able to use Psychic Scream, put them back in the deck, and build up to a big combo turn or stall out for a Mechathune or something is what Priest is really looking to do. So those tools are really good against Hunter, and that's another big reason that Priest has gotten a lot better. And then if we take a step back and look more at the general look at the meta, I mentioned it earlier with Druid specifically, but removing some of those more aggressive and faster decks along with Druid's ability to ramp and get extra mana and speed up the games, in general, the meta has really slowed down. So decks that take advantage of that slower meta are also going to do a lot better and be stronger in the current meta, which has again helped decks like Quest Mechathune Priest, which play out the quest, play some small Death Rattle minions, and get to build into Amara, which is a 5-mana 8/8 with Taunt that sets your health to 40. So even if your opponent has been able to hit you down and get you really low, you can play out Amara, go to 40 life, and stall out the game longer, and then you can play into Mechathune and be able to do your Mechathune combo and kill your opponent, especially if your opponent is also playing a slower deck. So what we will start to see as well are changes trying to find either new archetypes within classes that all of a sudden are no longer as good as they were, as well as more experimentation with classes that weren't as strong because of the other decks that were strong. Then if we even look more specifically kind of at detailed things in terms of tech cards, which are just specific cards that are not going to be good all of the time, that are not good in every deck, but are specific to what is very popular in the meta. So cards that destroy your opponent's weapon, or silence, or cards that destroy taunts, for example, make spells cost more. Those are all kind of tech cards. Mind control tech that has a battle cry. If your opponent has 4 or more minions on the board, it steals one of them. Those are all more situational and will only be good in certain metas and certain situations. So any type of nerf or expansion or big changes in the meta also impact the tech cards. So again, with these changes like we've seen, there are fewer wide boards, there are fewer weapons, so those tech cards are not as prevalent in the meta right now, and it's leading to even decks that were popular before, such as Death Rattle Hunter, have even changed a little bit because people can now take those cards out and put in different cards instead. Just as an overview, some of the main things that are impacted and that we want to evaluate and look at after changes are any decks that were strong before the changes, as well as what decks will be strong against the new strong decks, changes in the overall classes and archetypes, and tech cards as well. And that is a pretty general overview of the kinds of things that will happen in the meta and the kind of changes that take place after any nerf or expansion or just big shift in the meta at all. But those concepts are something that you can take into every change, every time there's a nerf, every time there's a new expansion. Those basic concepts are what you can start with to give you a foothold and try to figure out which direction you want to go, what type of deck do you want to play. Should you be playing an aggro deck? Should you be playing more of a control deck? and then you can narrow it down by class and what tools those classes have to fit into that situation that you want to aim for. So as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and good luck with any new change in the meta.